Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 69 for May 31st, 2021. And I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller. And if you're joining us today in the United States, I'd like to wish you a happy Memorial Day. Now, on this episode of Valor Media, I am really excited to share with you what I'd like to talk about today, because at this very moment, something is kind of unfolding in my life. And it's the culmination of many, many years of working and waiting and wondering if I'd ever get here. It was a long and winding road, and along the way there were innumerable twists and turns, and plenty of times that I was really tempted to just throw my hands up in the air and say, I quit, it ain't worth it. But you know what? I'm really glad that I didn't do that. I stayed the course. And as a result, right now I'm experiencing something really exciting that's unfolding, and I want to share that with you in just a moment. But before I do, I did want to say I'm not going to share this to promote myself. I'm not trying to blow my own horn. I don't want this to just be some feel-good story. I don't want it to just be something that's inspirational. For you, I want it to be something that hopefully is motivational. Because although I want to share what happened for me, you probably have a very different pursuit. The purpose of me sharing it is to say, you know what, even if something looks unattainable, it is worth staying the course. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, if you've listened to other episodes of Valor Media, you know that I'm a musician. I have a small recording studio in my house. I'm a songwriter and an instrumentalist, and for many years I've worked in so many different facets of music. My wife and I have both been worship leaders. We've done a lot of music ministry together, and I really have for a very long time wanted to do more in music. Now, I've pretty much been a musician my entire life. I started playing guitar when I was a kid. I did a lot of music in high school. I was in bands. I had a really close friend of mine back in the 90s that I spent a lot of time writing and recording with. And so over the years, I've had a lot of great opportunities. I've been connected with a lot of amazing, incredibly talented people. And I've really had a very fulfilling musical journey. But one of the things I really wanted to do was to release an album. Now, I had actually released an album many years ago in the late 90s. You know, today MP3s are incredibly common, but in the late 90s, that technology was just coming on the scene. And at that time, MP3s weren't just a file encoding, but it was actually a website. It was kind of a precursor of streaming services. And it was a venue where independent musicians could upload their recordings, and you could actually release an album through this MP3 site. So the church that I was attending at the time was full of incredible vocalists, instrumentalists, and songwriters, and I actually coordinated an album project where I worked with a lot of these folks. I basically provided an opportunity for anybody who wanted to bring their music into the project, and we released this album in 1999 on the MP3 platform. Well, over the years, of course, things began to change again with the entire music scene, different technology. The music business itself changed dramatically. But I always wanted to record and release an album just of my own stuff. And the vision that I had in my head was actually of working on an album with my wife. And about 6 months ago, I did a podcast episode where I talked about the fact that I really was always struggling with that because my wife works ridiculous hours, and I feel so connected with her musically. We write together. Like I said, we've led worship together, and I really wanted us to do an album together, but we never seemed to be in the same place at the same time. Her schedule was always in conflict with mine. And I held off for years on trying to pursue recording an album because I wanted to do one with her. And I was very adamant about it. It was an all or nothing thing. It was non-negotiable. It would be with Allie or it would not be at all. And that was kind of the stance I was in for a very long time until last summer. And that was where I kind of reevaluated everything. And I realized, you know what? If I wait until the perfect opportunity, if I wait until everything is just so, what could end up happening is I might end up never really doing anything. That's sort of where I found myself. And I talked with her about it, and she had encouraged me for a long time to do an instrumental album and just do it by myself. So I kind of mulled it over, and I thought, you know what, that seems like a decent approach. So I started working last summer, recording tracks for this album, and I wrote some new things. I had some odds and ends that had kind of lay there unfinished for years. And I even went back and pulled the very first bit of music I ever made up when I was about 8 years old. One of the first times I ever messed around on an acoustic guitar. I remember doing this little melody. It stuck with me all my life, and in one of the songs on the album, I was able to incorporate it back in. So that was very cool, and I started this project. I really got into it in late summer of 2020, and for the last 6 to 8 months, I have really pressed in with this. But the whole idea of recording an album, for me, that actually goes all the way back to 1986 with that buddy of mine that I was talking about. Now, he and I were good friends. We were writing songs together. We were playing music together, and we really wanted to record music. And in 1986, way, way, way in advance of the amazing technological developments we have now, things were still pretty primitive. And so what we did was the only thing you really could do in 1986. We pulled our money and we went halves on purchasing a cassette 4-track recorder. Now that might sound unbelievably clunky in 2021. In the summer of 1986, that was amazing. That was cutting-edge technology. We started off and we started making recordings, and I ached to do that. I wanted so much to do an album. And my friend and I worked and worked and worked. Well, we continued, and we got into it pretty seriously in 1991. And one of the things that my friend did was every time recording technology would change, he would invest in whatever the next thing was. So we moved from 4-track cassette recording to 8-track cassette recording. Not an 8-track tape, but a cassette tape that you could actually record 8 tracks on. And then moving into the 90s, that was when digital recording really came on the scene, and he moved into using digital audio tape. We went from a humble little setup in the basement of the first house he lived in to him actually building a full-fledged professional-grade recording studio in the house that he later moved into. Throughout the entire 1990s, we spent thousands of hours writing music, recording music, and we really wanted to be professional songwriters. He had a buddy from high school who had actually moved to Nashville and become a producer, and we had some music that we tried to get through him. I spent that entire decade culminating in that album I did at my church that I talked about earlier, and it was all wonderful. It was all good stuff, but I never did that solo album. I remember way back in 1986 feeling like I was going to just die if I didn't get an album out, but we were struggling with the limitations of this primitive, basic cassette technology. Well, fast forward all these years later, and this very week, I put the finishing touches on all of the files that I submitted to the company that will be distributing my new album in the streaming realm, in the digital download realm, even in CD sales. I'm hoping the album will be released by sometime around July 1st. For me, I'm kind of pinching myself to see if it's really happening. I remember being that young kid back in 1986, all those years ago, an incredibly long time ago, 35 years ago, hoping that someday I could do an album. Well, what's the moral to this story? I honestly don't know what will happen with this album. It might be completely overlooked. I might sell 5 copies. It might become a runaway success. I joke that if I become an overnight success, it'll be a 35-year overnight success. It's taken a long time. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Because the other thing that I wanted to mention is the fact that I waited years and years and years for what I was hoping would be that amazing moment that I could record with my wife. And it took her finally convincing me, nah, just go ahead and do it by yourself. I did it, and I don't have any regrets. Because amazingly enough, my wife is now coming into a time where she has a little bit more flexibility with her schedule, and we are actively looking at beginning to pursue doing music ministry together in the immediate future. Well, what's really cool about that is that in the time that I was doing this solo album, I learned a lot more than I already knew. Now, I had a pretty extensive background in home recording, but in the past 8 to 10 months, I have really honed my skills. And what's incredible is I now have a whole new toolkit to bring to the table when my wife and I start recording, which will probably be within the next month or so. And the amazing thing there is that wouldn't have happened if I had just sat around and waited for the magic moment when she would be available. If I had just said, oh no, that's okay, I'll wait another year. Well, you know, recording technology is one of those things that has a massive learning curve. And even if you get fairly fluent in it, if you step away from it for a while, you start to get a little bit rusty. And when your talents and your abilities get a little bit dulled, it's really a problem. Because it's not simply a matter of coming back and picking up where you left off. It's a matter of having to really get recalibrated. And that's time that you should have been spending creating music that you're spending just kind of relearning everything. So the reason I wanted to share this with you today is because there's a pretty high probability that in your professional life, there's some goal you've never reached for. Maybe you've convinced yourself it's just out of your grasp. It's not even worth trying. Maybe you're already in a profession, you're already working in a company, in a business, but you'd like to do more. You'd like to do something different. You'd like to do something that requires skills you don't currently have. Or maybe you want to create your own business. Or maybe you see a need in your community and you think to yourself, wow, if I could only put together a nonprofit to meet that need. But if you're like I used to be, you might be dancing that fine line between doing something and waiting for the perfect moment to do something. I finally realized that there wasn't going to be a perfect moment, and so for me, that became the perfect moment. I'm so thankful that everything unfolded the way that it did, and so I'd like to give you 10 takeaways from my journey that you can use on your journey toward whatever goal you're reaching for in your professional life. You know, there's a verse in the Bible, in the book of Galatians, where the Apostle Paul said, "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." Now, one translation says, "We will reap a harvest." Now, that verse is specifically talking about walking in the Christian faith, but if you walk in the Christian faith, it touches every corner of your life. So for me, that has a lot of professional application as well, and that's really the philosophy, I think, that guided me through finishing my album. No matter how tempted I was to throw in the towel, instead I decided to stay the course, to persevere, and to see it through to completion. So here are my 10 takeaways from the experience I just went through, and I want to share them with you so that they can help you on whatever journey you are on toward whatever professional goal you're reaching for. Number 1, consistency is king. Well, I certainly learned that the hard way. Like I said before, all those times that I would get pulled away from the studio for weeks on end, I always found myself coming back to a learning curve, trying to build that momentum again. Consistency does more for you than you can possibly imagine. The Valor Media podcast started in February of 2020, and within a few weeks, the pandemic was unfolding. We were closing our offices and figuring out how to work remotely. But we never missed a single week's episode of the podcast. And here we are, 69 weeks in, still at it. Number 2, don't invest too little. Now, that's something my wife oftentimes reminds me that I need to be wary of. When I'm doing any creative project, I tend to look on the budget end of things, and she will always remind me, don't cheap it out. Invest whatever you need to get decent enough tools to get the job done. You don't want to struggle through with something that's subpar. Make sure that you have a tool suited to whatever job or jobs you are working. Number 3, don't invest too much. The flip side of that coin is don't go after something that has all the bells and whistles if you don't really need them. Because at the end of the day, they're just bells and whistles. And you may find yourself overwhelmed with so many things to learn that you don't even need to learn. You get what you pay for, but sometimes when you pay more, you're buying fluff. And fluff may not serve you well. So try to strike a really judicious balance between what you need and what would be nice to have but isn't really necessary. Number 4, learn from people who started small but made it big. And I definitely did that in the realm of studying home recording. About 7 years ago, I discovered a YouTube channel called The Recording Revolution, hosted by a guy named Graham Cochran. He was an amazing instructor, and he explained really sound principles on how to make professional recordings in a home studio. Well, the amazing thing about him is that when he first started the recording revolution, he and his wife had an infant daughter. He had just lost his job, and the family was living on food stamps. But over the years, he persevered. He continued to develop more and more content, a lot of it free content. He gained a massive following, and he turned the recording revolution into a multi-million-dollar business, which enabled him to later open a virtual business coaching academy. He definitely moved from crisis to thriving and proved it can be done. Number 5, embrace deadlines. Now, you've probably heard me talk about deadlines before. I actually really love deadlines, both in a professional environment and even in my own creative space. Without deadlines, you have no way of measuring how far you've moved on the journey. If you're shooting for a target and you don't give yourself the pressure of getting something done in a measurable amount of time, there's a pretty high probability that you won't ever get anything done. So deadlines are not your enemy. They're one of the most powerful tools you can ever embrace, and they'll really keep you focused and in the proper framework. Number 6, don't be afraid of short-term sacrifices. Now, I had plenty of those in the course of recording my album. There were many, many nights, including very recently, that I would stay up until 2 or 2:30 a.m. working on it, only to turn around and get back up at 6:30 a.m. to get ready for a work day. Not something I would want to do indefinitely, but I was willing to do it for a short period of time because I needed to do it. And sometimes we have to make sacrifices like that. It can really be as simple as literally stepping out of your comfort zone. Number 7, look for your success, not somebody else's. It can be tremendously beneficial to study what other people do. If 10 million people before you went down a similar road, that's great. You can learn, especially from the mistakes they made. But remember this, they were on their journey, just like you are on your journey. You are a unique individual. You have a specific backstory. You have a life history. You have your own skills, talents, abilities, callings. I don't care if other people have made $10 million selling an album. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll make $10. It doesn't really matter. That's not why I'm doing it. I have my own parameters for success, and so should you. Number 8, don't care what everyone thinks. Care what trusted people think. There's a verse in the Bible that says, wisdom is found in many counselors. But wisdom isn't found in every counselor. A lot of people think they're an authority, they think they're an expert, they think they're a critic. But unless they've walked the walk, they may not really have anything constructive to offer to you. Seek out people who have actually lived the life, gone through the pursuit that you are in, faced all the heartbreak and all the setbacks and all the difficulties, and who have learned from their mistakes and can really communicate solid wisdom to you to help you on your journey. Number 9, don't be afraid to change direction. The story I told about my album is case in point. For a very long time, I was very stubborn, and I decided I will only do an album if I can record it with my wife, until I finally realized, and had it confirmed through her, that it was actually okay to do something solo. And in doing so, I gained so many skills and got so much more confident in my abilities. And that would have never happened if I had just been sitting around waiting for the day my wife had some spare time. Number 10, and this is probably the most important because it's the one that resonates with me the most. You're never too old. At the time of this recording, I am 56. There have been a lot of years that have passed since I was that kid way back in the summer of 1986, buying that cassette 4-track deck, hoping to somehow someday record an album. I had a lot of opportunities over the years to give up and decide, well, I guess that just passed me by. But you know what? I don't feel that way at all. I'm very determined to keep doing what I'm doing and to keep doing it for as long as I possibly can. You should feel the same way. It doesn't matter if you're 29 or 79. Pursue whatever you have wanted to pursue. Take steps, take risks, take a chance. You never know until you try. And if you don't, the worst thing that can happen is that someday you simply have nothing more to show than a dream that didn't come true and a regret that you never proved to yourself whether or not it was possible. I would much rather try something and fail miserably than never try and never know. I hope everything I shared with you today has been food for thought. I don't know what you're pursuing, but pursue something. Don't just stagnate and don't settle for status quo. If there's something you've always wanted to try, if there is something professionally you want to achieve, start today. It doesn't matter if you've, in your mind's eye, wasted the last 20 years, start today. The only time it's too late to start is when you're dead. If you're still living and breathing, you've still got time. Maybe for you, it's not even about a new pursuit. Maybe in your business or your vocation, you just want to go to a higher level. You want to do things better. You want to feel like you're not just spinning your wheels. If that sounds like you, Valor can help. You can reach out to us at info@valorxl.com, and somebody from our team can get back in touch with you and talk with you to get a really good understanding of what it is you want to do better in your business pursuits. Visit our website, www.valorxl.com, and check us out on Facebook at ValorXL. I mentioned earlier nonprofits. If you're trying to start a nonprofit, one of the key components is funding, and that invariably involves grants. Our executive director, Lori Riston, has recently put together an incredible training package called Face Your Fears. It's a grants writing workshop that will guide you through all the complexities of what can be an overwhelming process. You can check the course out by visiting www.valorxl.com/training. If you have suggestions for topics that you would like us to discuss in future installments of Valor Media, please contact us at media@thevalorcenter.org. You can visit us at thevalorcenter.org or on Facebook at Valor Ministries to get a better understanding of what the vision and mission of our organization really is. If this podcast is something you benefit from, would you consider benefiting us by financially assisting us so that we can continue to bring you this kind of content in the future? If so, please visit www.thevalorcenter.org and click on Donate to give securely online. Or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. Please subscribe to this podcast and please share it with someone you think would benefit from it. Thanks again for being with me today. Please join us again next week for another episode. And until then, remember this: you were made to thrive.